The Métis, like every cultural group, have their own forms of artistic expression. These art forms are influenced by the social and cultural traditions of the Métis, which blended Euro-Canadian, European, and First Nations customs, beliefs, and values. This combination created a distinct population from which evolved a unique sense of Métis identity. Today, the fur trade sash remains a highly symbolic aspect of Métis identity, as it has for generations. The origin of the sash is unknown, as its use was quickly adopted by numerous Indigenous groups. One possibility for the First Nations origin of the sash comes from the Eastern Woodlands nations, who practiced the art of making wampum belts. Being both sacred and diplomatic, wampum belts were used to record history and were given to other nations to cement peace and friendship treaties. While these belts may have been the inspiration for the fur trade sash, they were not worn on the body. In Western Canada, the sash is associated with the Métis, while in Central and Eastern Canada, it is associated with traditional French Canadian, Acadian, and First Nations culture. Each of these groups has worn and made different varieties of sashes. The variety of sash worn by the Métis, known in French as saencheur flechey or arrow belt, was originally crafted by French Canadian artisans in the village of Saskatchewan, northeast of Montreal, from about 1780. Later, the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois began to manufacture this fur trade staple as it gained popularity throughout North America. The sash was brought out to Western Canada by French Canadian and to a lesser extent Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe or Algonquin voyageurs working with the Northwest Company. Despite their origins, the first fur trade sashes were clearly based on First Nations finger weaving techniques using European materials and design. First Nations women from throughout the Americas have for centuries practiced the art of finger weaving using plant fibers and wool from indigenous fauna. But it was not until the beginning of the European fur trade that lamb's wool, a necessary component in the manufacture of sashes, was first readily made available to Aboriginal women. As First Nations and Métis women gained access to this wool through both the Hudson's Bay Company and the Northwest Company, they began experimenting with numerous patterns and colors. Métis women soon developed their own patterns and occasionally incorporated glass beads into the weave. The homemade, hand-woven sashes varied in size, design, and color and were typically constructed of a looser weave than those that were manufactured. Sash patterns could be intricate and varied, displaying the weaver's expertise. Most traditional hand-woven sashes were about 15 centimeters wide and 2 meters long, although some reached 6 meters in length. A typical sash had a red band or core in the center, paralleled by a series of colorful zigzags forming arrow designs, giving the sash the name arrow belt. Sashes could also differ in the way in which the ends or fringe were finished. Some possibilities were to leave the edges raw, to trim them evenly, to braid them, to unravel them, or to twist them together, 2 strands at a time. Although patterns were varied, as the demand for sashes increased, there was a move among manufacturers to standardize the form and design. quality sashes were made from very fine wool, which was waxed and retwisted. These sashes were woven so tightly that they were water resistant and could be used to carry small amounts of water. A top quality sash using 300 to 400 fine waxed woolen threads usually took about 200 hours to complete. A lower quality sash made from approximately 100 thicker woolen threads could be made in about 70 or 80 hours. On average, an arrow or point was made the length of the weaver's index finger, about 9 centimeters long. As a result, most weavers made about 21 arrows or points per meter of sash. Some pieces, however, exhibit double the number of arrows per meter. The most popular colors used by weavers making sashes were red, pale blue, dark blue, yellow, and green. In some cases, beads were introduced among the threads or strung in as decoration or to outline the arrows. For the Métis, the sash was more than a decorative piece of clothing. It was a highly practical garment with numerous uses. Worn tied around the waist, it was used to keep clothing secure, and personal items such as a medicine, tobacco, a pipe, or a first aid kit could be tucked into the folds and kept secure. Hands could also be kept free by tucking items such as knives or small bags into the folds of a sash. The sash could be used as a rope, used to pull canoes over portages, or as a makeshift dog harness. It could also be used to harness heavy loads on the backs of men and women who unloaded freight canoes and York boats. It could be used as a towel or washcloth, and the long fringes could be tied and used to count furs, or could be taken apart to be used as an emergency sewing kit. During the early 19th century, sashes became an important trade item for both the Hudson's Bay Company and the Northwest Company. These manufactured fur trade sashes were sold mainly to the Métis in the Red River settlement and to French Canadians. Over time, the Hudson's Bay Company began manufacturing Assumption sashes in England using less time and labor-intensive industrial looms. These mass-manufactured sashes were less durable and less attractive than the hand-woven variety, and almost led to the abandonment of the art of finger weaving. Fortunately, folklorists such as Marius Barbeau revived the art in the 1920s and 30s. Today, finger weaving continues to be taught in Métis families and through cultural institutes, museums, and art classes in Quebec and Western Canada. Artist and teacher Penny Condon has taught finger weaving to numerous students and to children at Métis cultural events such as Back to Patoche Days held annually at Patoche. Penny, who was invited to instruct students at St. Francis School in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, feels that finger weaving is truly an expression of the creativity of the weaver.
I choose the rainbow pattern because it's the easiest for students to do, and it's easiest to see any discrepancies in your work. Here is a sash, beautiful sash I might add, that is an arrow sash. It's called an arrow because of arrowheads throughout the sash. And I guess what makes finger weaving so much fun is that the weaver gets to actually name their sash when it's done. The pattern they make is the pattern that, or the name that they decide to give it.
To finger weave a small sash, you will need the following materials: yarn in a variety of colors, popsicle sticks, masking tape, and scissors.
I also pick yarn, inexpensive synthetic yarn that isn't too thin. If it's too thin, you have to use more strands of yarn. To make a sash, a small sash about 20 to 30 centimeters long will take about 90 to 100 minutes. It is also recommended that beginners start with no more than 12 strands, 3 colors, 4 strands of each color. This will make weaving more manageable for students. For older students, have the students pick their color and measure it on their desk. And measure 12 strands of the width of their desk, doing with each colors. For smaller children, you might want to pre-cut the string, ready to distribute. So to begin, separate your 4 colors and start with 1 color at a time. I'll start with yellow. You put it on front of your stick, you wrap it around once, and you let a small strand dangle on the other side. Move it down. Wrap it around once, small strand dangles, move to the side. On top or in front of the stick, around once. You will repeat this for all 12 strands of yarn. What you're going to do now is you're going to separate the long thread or long strands from the shorter strands, and you're going to give it a tug so it's nice and tight. With the shorter strands, you do have enough here that you're going to want to tie it just in a knot. And this will keep the strands from coming off your stick. Okay, the next step, you'll take masking tape or any tape that you have, as long as you're securing it onto the desk, and you want to be able to tape it to the end of the desk. It makes it easier for students to work. If they tape it up here, the table is going to get in the way and your children will get frustrated. So move it to the end of the desk. Tape it down. This might be a bit harder because popsicle sticks are flatter, so it will be easier for the kids. Hopefully that'll... You always want to start on the right-hand side of your 12 strands of yarn. So you start on the right-hand side of the blue, And you always start with over. So you go over one, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, and over. Once you've finished the last one, you take the last one and you place it up, last strand, and you place it up. You're going to want to separate the strands and to see if you've done them right. Now that you've separated them, you're going to start with the bottom group of strands, and you're going to start by going over. Always start with going over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over, and under. And because you finished with under, the strand that is up on top, you have to go over it. You replace that strand with the new strand and bring the old strand down. Here, I want to separate to do a check. Right here, you can tell that this one here should be down with the other rest of them. And then you know you've done it right. You just give it a little tug after each one. So you start with the right hand side, over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under. So if it was under, you must go over the last strand that's up, replace it, put that one up, and bring this one down. Separate the two, pull it tight, move that one up. What should happen is all the blue strands are going to be on the left-hand side. Now you must start with your last blue again by going over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under. Because it was under, it goes over, and you replace it again. So you pull it tight, you'll move that up. Okay, this is when we're now on the red. Over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under. Replace it up here by going over the string, bring it down. Separate, pull tight, pull that up, and you're ready to start over. Again, you always start on the bottom right hand side and you go over the top, under the bottom, over the top, under the bottom, over, under, over, under, over, under. Over, under, over. See right here, I want to grab the blue, but because I've just finished a yellow and I've only done 2 of them, I know there's 2 more to follow. So I can move that over, grab the yellow that's supposed to, and continue again. If you always know you're doing 4 colors of, or 4 strands of one color, it'll make it easier to follow your weaving. Over, under, over, under, oops, over, under, over, under, over that one, separate, check to see if you've made a mistake. You haven't. Begin again. So now you're starting on the yellow. Over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under. Replace the red. Okay, finished with under, bring it over. By separating and tightening or by pulling the 2 strands, you're tightening your weave. If you choose not to do that, you'll have a looser weave, which is fine. It all depends on the weaver and their preference to how they want it. So your sash should have a diagonal effect and always go from color to color. You'll have the 3 colors, whatever you start with, will be on the end. So you have the red, the yellow, the blue, red, yellow, blue, and it'll always alternate that way. To finish it off, it's best to take, you can separate the 2, like you always have done. Look at the 2, grab 1 yellow from the bottom, 1 from the top, tie it in a knot as close as you can to the weave. You don't want your weave to come unraveled. Okay, you'll grab one from the bottom and the top. If you grab two from the top and two from the bottom, you still have that chance of it becoming unraveled. You need to grab one from the bottom and one from the top. So by separating them, this allows you to see which ones are on the bottom, which ones are on the top. So we'll grab a bottom of the blue and the top of the blue. And you tie it as close as you can to the weave. Okay, this was the one that's up. When you're getting to this part, you have two on the bottom, but because this was over, if you had to bring it down, it would be considered under. So you take this over, this under, tie it as close to the end. You're left with the last two. And you've tied it off. Oops. And the students have their own choices here because they can decide to braid the fringe. They can unravel them. They can trim them all one length. So how they do the end is up to them. Okay. So if we braid them, I'll take 3. And you go as long as you want your fringe to be. Again, you'd have to tie it off. Grab the next 3. And because there's 12 strands, it works out good.
Today, the sash continues to be a symbol of Métis identity and can be seen at Métis cultural and political events. In fact, Métis communities often honor the social, cultural, or political contributions of talented Métis by awarding them the Order of the Sash. This award, which parallels the Order of Canada, is a tangible means of expressing and preserving Métis identity and culture while striving towards self-determination.